You're watching Full View on the SABC News channel. My name is Sherwin, Bryce-Pease, and you join us here at the United Nations headquarters for our conversation with South Africa's International Relations and Cooperation Minister, Minister Ronald Lamola. The first time in this capacity that we have this kind of conversation, Minister, a warm welcome to the United Nations and welcome back to New York.
Thank you very much. It's indeed the first time, but we've engaged previously when I was here, remember.
But not since the promotion.
Yes.
I want to start with the day's current events and the escalation we are witnessing across Lebanon's southern border with Israel. The Security Council will meet in an emergency session later this afternoon after the exploding pagers and walkie-talkies targeting Hezbollah militants killed at least 32 people and injured more than 3,000. The Israeli defense minister said that they are now at the start of a new phase in this war as the hopes for a ceasefire in Gaza hangs by a thread. That thread might already have been severed. You said in Washington recently that the United States was in the most strategic and powerful position to end this war. That by continuing to send arms to Israel, the United States was essentially fueling this conflict. But in the absence of the United States taking a firmer stance against Israel, what other remedies does the international community have to end this war?
The international community has a remedy through the Security Council, which its resolutions must be respected. There is also other tracks that are also important in finding a ceasefire, in finding de-escalation. But I'm happy that the United States is now also leading this process of engagement to find some peaceful resolution to de-escalate the conflict that is currently unfolding. But the prime platform is the Security Council, as you have said, is going to meet this afternoon. I hope that the further measures towards ensuring this escalation, ceasefire, and ensuring that all the parties understand their role in finding a peaceful solution.
That would demand a different posture from the United States, right? You talk about the Security Council, there are P5 members, one of them the United States, that has a veto. You are saying this is the avenue that can remedy the situation, but the United States is there with its veto in support of Israel.
Yes, and you will know, particularly with the Gaza conflict, it took us more than a year to end up finding the United States agreeing to come up with a resolution that ended up being accepted by all member states, right, which led to the current ceasefire resolution with regards to Gaza. And I believe it's the same on this matter. It will be important that those that are very powerful and who are at a strategic position plays that key role initiating and de-escalating the conflict. And ourselves, we stand ready to encourage engagement, to encourage de-escalation, but also to ensure that there is no, we are anti-war as South Africa, but we also want to see parties coming together, right, engaging to find a peaceful solution, but also to put more resources in this platform of the United Nations in the Summit of the Future and the UNGA to development done to fund wars.
You mentioned the Summit of the Future. Let's talk a bit about that. It's being held precisely to reshape how multilateralism essentially works, right? Towards making global institutions more legitimate, more effective to deal with the complexity of the challenges that face humanity, including the situation in Gaza, issues of peace and security, to climate change, a framework to govern artificial intelligence, development financing, debt relief, and so on. What do you make, Minister, of the summit and its objectives and the growing skepticism that it's simply not going to meet the moment despite the huge diplomatic capital being invested in the outcome documents, including the Pact of the Future, which is still not finalized? What do you make of the summit?
We think it is a step in the right direction. A foundation has been laid from the last year's engagement, and now there will be further engagement. As you have said, the Pact of the Future not yet finalized, but at least an emerging consensus. It's emerging. And you will know that that pact will be adopted on the basis of consensus. So it is clear that there will be some consensus on the minimum program in relation to the Pact of the Future, on the issues we have raised, governance of issues of climate change, artificial intelligence, issues related to critical minerals going into the future, and what becomes the role of each member state's debt relief programs. So we think this foundation, right, is very key to take us forward into a minimum program of implementation.
Minister, you've seen the U.S. proposal in support of 2 African permanent seats in a future reformed UN Security Council, but without the veto. The U.S. has been quite explicit that it has no intention of giving up its veto, but that extending it to others was simply not going to happen. What do you make of the US proposal, given that it flies in the face of the AU's common position, contained in the Ezulwini Consensus, that as long as the veto exists as a matter of common justice, it should be available to all permanent members, new and old?
Yes, that remains the position of the AU, the Ezulwini Consensus. And it is a position based on the fact that, as you are aware, most of the conflicts happen mostly in the global south, particularly in the African continent and other parts of the world. But we are seized by this huge challenge that the Security Council deals with in our continent, and it is in that context that we are of the firm view that the veto power remains important. But we think that the proposal by the US should be seen and be welcomed as a step in the right direction in terms of engagement. Something is now on the table. They have put it that will enable this discussion to happen. As you will be aware, it has been taking long for quite some time. They have now moved to at least say we can shift to this level of 2. It means that there is something that we can further persuade them, or they can persuade us with regards to the Ezulwini Consensus in taking this matter further. And we think that engagement has to continue to happen.
Africa has, of course, called for 2 permanent seats for Africa and an additional 5 non-permanent seats on a rotational basis. And what we are now hearing from this long-standing intergovernmental negotiation process, that it's time for Africa to indicate, Minister, who its preferred 2 permanent seats are going to be. There's a group called the G4 in these negotiations: Brazil, India, Japan, and Germany. They are all seeking permanent seats for themselves, so they're very specific about what they want. Has the time not come for Africa to show its hand? And let me ask you, is South Africa going to vie for one of those permanent 2?
Yeah, we will definitely show our hands, and that should happen at the platform of the AU. But also, as you are aware, these 2 permanent seats are seats at the United Nations. So there is that kind of dynamic relationship that will also have to respect at that platform, that the platform is given the space to then take this Africa initiative forward for these 2 permanent seats. And South Africa will always avail itself to play a role in these important platforms.
When is the African Union going to decide on the 2 African seats, though? I mean, it's been talking about 2 seats in a very abstract way. Who is it going to be? There are 54 African countries. Who's going to occupy the 2 seats? You have to decide, surely.
You could not decide when there were no 2 seats. They were not there, so you could not even have that discussion. The first battle that we had
But I've just used the G4 example. They've told you that we don't know how many seats they're going to get, but they're at least saying we want them.
Yeah, but we don't have that luxury. We do not have those 2 seats. We must first fight that those 2 seats must be allowed, they must be there. Then we will be able to say these are the countries. But as I've said, South Africa will always avail itself to participate and play a role in multilateral platforms of the AU and that of the United Nations.
So to be clear, South Africa wants to be a permanent member of the Security Council.
We will participate, yes.
You arrived, sir, in New York straight from a week-long visit to Washington, D.C., where you engaged university students, members of the Black Congressional Caucus, some United States senators, and Republican members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee who authored the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act, which passed the House of Representatives in May. You refer to the relationship between South Africa and the United States as, quote, dynamic and evolving. Is dynamic and evolving good or bad for your priorities, which of course include greater investment that addresses issues of unemployment and poverty and the long-standing inequities that exist in South Africa?
Yeah, it is good because there are positives that you can take from this, and that is what we've shared with the Congress, that one, South Africa is a democracy. Mm-hmm. We share this as a common value, the 2 countries who have just recently come out of elections, free and fair, despite challenges and glitches, but the elections were free and fair. And we are also having an independent judiciary, free press, freedom of association. All these are common values that these 2 countries share. The rest of the challenges, including at bilateral levels, we must be able to engage and find some kind of a common ground and solution. And there's been some of the mutual beneficial relationship that the 2 countries have had, like AGOA, the PEPFAR program, and other programs that we have played a role in many parts of the continent. So there is a stress that can be put on positive way forward. The way we have got disagreements, we respectfully engage and agree to disagree. Where we agree, we move forward.
We know that South Africa's long-standing position in foreign policy is that it is human rights centric, right? At the Quincy Institute in DC, you said, we as a country are anti-war. You even reiterated that here today. You were also asked specifically to clarify South Africa's position on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which violated that country's territorial integrity, actions, of course, which run counter to the UN Charter, which South Africa, like all the other 192 member states, is obliged to uphold. Ukraine has also now crossed into Russian territory in the Kursk region, which is also a violation of the UN Charter. So if South Africa's position, sir, is that international law is not optional when it suits one's national interest, how does that inform South Africa's current position on Ukraine, which has been a sticking point in your deliberations in Washington?
Yeah, as you have said, we have said it in various platforms of the UN and even in the peace initiative that we advocate and respect the territorial integrity of all nations, and the UN Charter should be respected. And we have said that all the issues, the sticking points, must be part of the peace initiative that is already engaged with, that is happening in Switzerland, which must then find resolutions to the number of sticking points that both countries have. The only sticking issue now that has led to the process not going forward is the reality that now we believe that it is time to also bring Russia onto the table of this discussion, because they are not on the table, and it will be difficult to find a solution when it is only one-sided engagement. It must involve everyone so that we can then discuss this issues to move forward.
So both parties should sit around the table. What precedent, though, Minister, would it set were Russia to keep the 27% or so of Ukrainian land that it now occupies? We have both seen what the ICJ said about Israel's control of the occupied Palestinian territories in an advisory opinion in July, and we have similarly seen what the ICJ, in an advisory opinion in March of 2022, said to Russia in terms of suspending its military operation and withdrawing its troops from Ukrainian territory. Is the ICJ less relevant in terms of Russia's obligations, but more so in terms of what Israel's obligations are?
No, it is not. And hence we say the engagement in the peace initiative process will be where all the sticking points will be engaged. And even
but you want Israel to withdraw from Palestinian territory based on the ICJ judgment, the advisory opinion. And I'm saying there's a similar advisory opinion saying that Russia must withdraw, and yet you don't call for Russia to withdraw. Yeah, why is there that disparity?
There's no disparity. It's that peace initiative process will deal with all the sticking points. As you have said, both parties have invaded each other. Right. And it's clear that there is a need for a meeting of minds amongst both parties to find an amicable solution or a long-lasting, peaceful solution. And that is our position.
Minister, on Sudan, a high-level meeting will be hosted here by the United States, France, Germany, and the EU. And we often hear about African solutions for African problems. And yet it's Western nations that are facilitating these peace talks and high-level meetings at UNGA. Is that contradictory to the African position that we will solve our own problems?
As you are aware, there is a process by the AU, which is an initiative that is aimed to find this solution. But this conflict, as you may be aware, is more complex because of other capitals,
external factors,
of the countries that you have mentioned being involved. So you can no longer avoid them participating in this discussion to find a solution, so that all the role players on the ground, they are able to take cue from this discussion. So it is important, but there is a fact and a track that the AU is involved in, which continuously give it the African Union context.
Minister, we've got about 3 minutes. I have two more questions. Let's talk about the use of the word oppressors in DC. I don't really have a question. Just clarify your use of the word oppressors in terms of inviting, quote, oppressors into the new government of national unity. You were making a broader point of what Nelson Mandela's ANC was doing in terms of South Africa's democracy. Just explain your use of that word for the sake of clarity.
Yeah, is that Nelson Mandela invited the oppressors when he came in to engage with them, to also participate in the government of national unity in 1994. And we said that we know that the DA are not a representative of the oppressors, but they do represent the status quo. The ANC has chosen to engage everyone in South Africa, including the DA and all the parties, to form a government of national unity, so that we put the people of South Africa first and move forward instead of bickering about power, despite the fact that we did not get a two-thirds majority or a 50% plus one, and no one got to be able to lead the country. So we needed to have everyone on the table to take the country forward. And I think this is a very, it's a beacon of democracy across the globe. And that is what we said. And we are saying it in the context to the Americans, that as they go to elections, 270 million people, it looks like only about 100,000 will end up deciding who wins the election. So it will be difficult to accept, but they will have to accept because democracy can never be perfect.
Minister, I know there will be some engagement with business and investors. I know that's part of the President's itinerary. I don't have time to ask that question. Our time is up, but let me thank you first and foremost for making time to have this conversation with me today.
Thank you very much.
South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, in conversation here as a precursor to President Cyril Ramaphosa's arrival in New York to attend the Summit of the Future, which kicks off on Sunday, and of course the UN General Assembly's high-level week. His address to the General Assembly will be on Tuesday, and we'll certainly share those times so that we take them live here on SABC News. Back to you in studio.
Thank you very much. That's my colleague Sherwin, Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent, in conversation with International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola.